Okay. All right. I think we're good. I think we're recording. Yep. It says okay. All right. Hi. This is Jonathan Nikkila, and welcome you again to our Election Essentials webinar that I do with Christian at Our Turn Action Network, and we're continuing to have people join and follow. It's been a lot of fun to share the things that Christian and I have learned over the years, and I look forward to our webinar today because it's a little different. Because when I talk about all the things I've learned over the years, a lot of it I've just got from other people. And two of those people that I've learned a lot from are going to be on the webinar today. So I'm really excited to do that. We're doing a little different format here with some guests. Uh, just a reminder, in this second phase, we've already done a couple webinars. We're moving forward with a few others, and we're going to talk about how to be nonpartisan in a partisan world, which is a real struggle for advocacy organizations. We'll talk about how to build political coalitions in subsequent weeks, recruiting candidates as you kind of come out of this cycle and begin to prepare for the next. And then finally, how to respond when an election ends. So just because the ballots are in doesn't mean your work is done. There are things you need to do following an election to make sure you get the most out of it. Christian, I mean, what of the remaining after this one today and the four we have to go, which ones really stand out to you that you think you have a lot to share?
That's a great question. I think what everyone's talking about right now is like how to operate in this world and COVID going on, and I think we are all about to face that reality and what we need to adapt and what lessons we're going to learn immediately. So I think that's increasingly top of mind. A school starting used to be, well, we'll have a solution, we'll have a plan, and now there's plans in place. We'll see how successful they are, and as we all know, when these plans are hatched, they're rarely taking into account those who are most marginalized and those who need the most resources. So I'm hoping that this pandemic allows us to really refocus the energy and need to make sure everyone has a level playing field here.
All right, and then that'll link to what's interesting for the week. But just quickly, I think we've introduced you all to Christian and I over the last several months, but just a reminder about Christian's background and mine, and just again, it's been our careers to help advocates transform themselves into electoral advocates as well. So we just continue to enjoy doing this. So this week, we are going to do something a little different. We've done just Christian and me for a while, but we want to bring some guests on because there are a lot of other great perspectives out there. And one of the biggest things is, as a third party, is how candidates perceive you. How can you better approach them? And who better to talk to about that than folks with the background of that. So after we do our What's Interesting, we'll jump into that. And so my What's Interesting, Christian, for this week relates to what you were just talking about. And it talks about the DNC campaign ad attacking Trump on the start of school. And my reason for including this is because, to me, it's the first time I've really seen education related to the COVID discussion begin to seep directly into the political discussion. And, I think no matter where you are on any of that, it's just important for folks to understand that candidates are this is beginning to be an actual political issue. I think early in COVID, schools were a bit of an afterthought in terms of the politics. And now it is a litmus test issue. Do you want schools to open or not? It seems like. And I think that candidates need to be careful in third-party groups because I just think there are a lot of strong opinions on this. And to me, I would, if I was a candidate or third party planning to use this in an election, I would absolutely pull it because I think anecdotal assumptions here are not strong enough. So, Christian, I don't know if you've thought about this at all, but to me, third-party groups, I just would tread carefully. Not that you shouldn't speak up for the right thing, but I think there's a lot of strong views here, and it's a potential minefield.
I couldn't agree more. You have to poll and figure out how and where people's minds are at. I think we have a full spectrum on it, and thinking that just because everyone's talking about COVID, you at the local level should talk about COVID is short-sighted. You definitely have to poll and figure out where your community is. Because to your point, a lot of things are afterthought, whether it's education, whether it's people's mortgages and things of that nature usually comes to the forefront of people's minds. So definitely would poll. And I do think that this is something that you could, if it polls well, there's enough media attention to where your campaign could easily ride the coattails of someone else who is either running pro or against, whatever the current state of affairs is locally.
Yeah. It's just interesting. Like I said, I hadn't seen candidates really getting into this issue, but now it's becoming part of that conversation. So just something for folks to keep an eye on and continue to see how the political parties and candidates deal with it. All right, well, let's get on to our main reason for being here. And again, we're going to talk about working with candidates and elected officials. And just as a little bit of a recap from what we've done in the past on this topic, just a refresher for working with candidates. I think the main thing that you have to remember is that a candidate is trying to get votes. They're trying to get to that 50 plus 1%. And so when you are an advocate, you need to always remember to approach them understanding how do they think you're going to help them get to that goal. You need to know what's in their mind when you're talking to them, and use their time really wisely in that sense. Because if you're not getting them to their goal, they're ready to move on. So be respectful of their time, be respectful of what it is they're trying to do to win their election, so that they are more respectful of that, so that you're respectful of that, so you have a better relationship with them. But it's really important that your particular issue isn't necessarily their priority. Their priority is winning the election, and how can you assist them with that? So for our presentation today, I want to introduce two folks who are going to talk to us about this. The first is former State Senator Ann Duplessis from Louisiana, and currently is a vice president for Liberty Bank and Trust Company in New Orleans, Louisiana. Also currently still on the LSU Board of Supervisors, Ann?
No, I'm off of
No, not on the board, but formerly on the LSU Board of Supervisors.
Right.
And, a lot of respect for Ann, and been through a lot of interesting political fights in her career, and I think a lot of there. Scott Jensen is from Wisconsin, and Scott is a former state legislator and former Speaker of the House of Wisconsin. Currently, he is the leading partner at Chartwell Strategic Advisors, among other businesses that he and his family are a part of. And really admire Scott a lot for his combination of policy and political knowledge. And I always say fewer people are so good at both. Like Scott has, both feet very firmly. A lot of candidates heavily nerd out on the policy, and some of them nerd out on the politics, and Scott really does well at both. So Scott and Ann, thank you for being part of our Election Essentials.
Thanks for having us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, basically, we're just doing a question and answer here for folks. And so I'm just going to get it rolling with our first question for both of you. And we'll just kind of riff off these questions and help people, again, look at what they're doing from the eyes of an elected official. And just as a refresher, quick for Ann and Scott, and I mentioned this in our setup with you, but the people that are following our webinar are the kind of people that either have a third-party organization, either has a political organization, they want to do it better, or they're thinking about adding that component to their advocacy work. So that's who you're speaking to.
Great.
All right. So, what happened? What happened to all my slides? Oh, there we go. Sorry, I had them out of order. Okay. So the first thing, I'm sorry, technical problems. But the first thing I wanted to ask you both was, going back to your first run for public office, were you prepared for all the third-party groups that were going to engage? Was that something that you knew was coming? Ann, do you want to go with that? Take that first.
Well, actually, no, because for me, I wasn't really a veteran politician, and it was all very new to me as well. But no, I really wasn't expecting that I would have so many groups who could profess to be the savior, right? Who could bring the votes, who could get me elected, who could be on the streets and get the street votes. So no, it really, it was sometimes a little overwhelming.
Yeah. What about you, Scott?
I had the opposite perspective than Ann. was well versed in politics at the time. I was the governor's chief of staff, Governor Tommy Thompson, in Wisconsin, and I was leaving that job to go run for my hometown legislative seat that had opened up, and it was in a special election. So I was quite aware of all the groups that were going to be supportive of me. What I didn't know was that I was going to end up in a race really where it was me versus one third-party group, the teachers union.
Ah,
I was from a safe Republican district. The primary was everything that mattered. I walked into it with lots of resources. I quit my job to run, so I had lots of time and was out there pounding 13,000 houses, introducing myself to people, and things were going well. I scared out everybody else in the race except for one farmer in the town next door to my hometown, and he stuck in the race. And then the teachers union decided, here's a chance for an upset. And they went in and spent tens of thousands of dollars. They had people going door to door, used all sorts of what were then new technologies. And on election night, I won my primary by just 38 votes. So I had a very quick education in the power of third-party groups. Now, thankfully, I had a lot of folks on my side as well. But in the end, it was a race where it was essentially me versus a third-party group, not the other candidate who was on the ballot. And they just wanted to send a message to the governor, and I was a convenient way to do that.
yeah. Wow. That's interesting because I'm, of course, an African-American Democrat, right? And I too had a third-party group that I was running against, which was a teachers union. So it was quite interesting. I think it was their fear that my views were a lot more progressive as it related to education and education reform. So they weren't ready for that.
Gotcha. By the way, just technical thing. Can you guys see the question okay on the screen?
No, it's showing working with candidates and elected officials.
All right. Let me just get back to this here.
Here we go. Okay.
Okay. My apologies. So, okay. So sorry for the technical difficulty there, but so do you guys think that most candidates have that lack of, like, where do you think most candidates are? Are they on the, they know what they're into spectrum, or do you think they're on the not ready?
Scott, I believe most candidates are aware of the environment, right? And that there are special interest groups. There are, as I like to call them, wannabe kingmakers or queen makers. And so I think most candidates go in knowing and really have in some instances, like here in Louisiana, we have groups that are as I call them, kingmakers, and they want to control the candidate. They want to control the message, and so you'll have a candidate who looks at the popularity of a certain group, or the power of a certain group, or the power of the people within that group, and will seek them out for support. So I think I was just I was not looking to run for public office. It was one of those situations where we had an elected official, a state senator, who was just wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing as regarding policy for our community, or just representing the community. And so I challenged him and eventually won.
I think I was surprised by the number of groups. I knew there was a lot of special interest groups out there. I'd worked at the Capitol for, I don't know, 5-6 years at that point. I knew the leaders of lots of the groups, but when you get back to the district and you're running, there's just groups that come out of the woodwork that you never heard of, left-handed bicyclists for better gardening principles or something. And you're like, really, there's a group for that? And they want to sit down and meet with you and talk with you about their issues. The great thing is you learn a lot about the district. You get to meet a lot of people, but most of the groups really have no clout in the elections. They have a passion for a particular issue, and it's a small group of a few people who care about a particular park or something. a candidate can end up consuming a great deal of their time meeting with all of these people who have, in some cases, very little influence. There are other groups, though, as Ann pointed out, with who see themselves as kingmakers and often are in these districts. They can often determine who the next legislator will be or who the next winner will be in the election.
Yeah. Well, let's go on to the next question here, and there we go. So, and this is sort of playing off this continued conversation. So, how big a role, like, so Scott and Ann, you both said there are a lot of groups. Some have a lot of clout. Some think they do, or some want you to pay attention to them even if they don't. How big a role does do the third parties play in deciding elections of today? And how much of it is overstated? And then how has that changed during your careers?
Boy, I think the role of third-party groups is increasing, at least for certain types of offices. When it comes to things like a race for the United States Senate, it's entirely possible that outside groups will spend more money than either of the candidates in the general election. It's pretty common. We're seeing that happen a lot more at the state legislative level. But then you count the town board, the school board, those are still pretty much shoe leather races where people spend a few hundred or a few $1,000s, and there really aren't many outside groups that have much influence there. I do think in some ways some of the reforms that people have pushed over the years because they were worried about money in politics have inadvertently actually increased the role of third-party groups. When you limit how much money candidates can accept, you are empowering these other third-party groups who have no limits and have great access to resources to play an even bigger role in our nation's politics. So, plus there are some things that I think third-party groups can do that candidates aren't necessarily comfortable with. So a lot of candidates are really leery about doing any negative campaigning, don't want to be seen as talking bad about their opponent. But third-party groups are quite happy to do that. And that in turn means more money flows to those third-party groups from people who believe that case needs to be made.
Right. Yeah, I think, I think that locally, when you have a group that has, I guess, has commanded attention within your district or a certain segment of the voting population, that the as I call it, the ground campaigning becomes very important, because those are the people who are actually who have tentacles, and they're talking to the actual voters. And so they're creating the opinion, they're creating the brand, they're creating the image of the candidate, whether it's good or bad. And in many cases, when you're looking at a local election, you don't have the money to get on television, and you don't have the money to put all of the billboards up all over the city, or to tell the story through whatever media and through commercials. So you just don't have that in many cases. So what you need is to have that ground group, right, that is creating the message and creating the buzz. And so I think from that perspective, when you have that type of activity that is taking place amongst the groups, that becomes, to me, I think that's very valuable. One of the things that what I found in many cases, yes, a lot of those, and I'm not talking about, in this instance, a special interest group, perhaps. I'm speaking of just those organized political groups who have determined they want to create the next elected official, right? And have an influence in who the next elected official is. Well, they're getting their money from others, right, that want to control that elected official. So I know I didn't have I had no money to pay a group to support me. I had a vision, and I had, I had a passion. But there were others who cared about the outcome. And so they were willing to pay these third party organized groups, separate and apart from a special interest, but an organized political group, to get the vote out, to be on the streets, to be the voice, right? And honestly, that was very, very impactful.
That's really good to know, because these groups that are thinking about doing this work as an advocate, to know that, you made a difference in your race, and Scott's seeing it make a difference in races. So I think it's important we've tried to stress, and most people aren't following this if they don't somewhat believe that it's important, but
Yeah.
it's important to stress that you are making an impact as a third party group, whether it's, a candidate like your case, Ann, where you didn't have the resources, or like Scott saying, in a case, because of laws have kind of pushed the impact towards third party groups, that they can have an impact. And I don't want to dominate this, so I'll let.
Here's another thing that makes the role of third party groups, I think, even more important now, is that increasingly it's very, very hard to find volunteers to work
Yes.
for a campaign. So I, my first race, I had a crack crew. I had like 6 people who were willing to work every day, and on the weekends I could get it up to maybe a dozen folks, and that was a lot. Nowadays it's very hard. It's often just the candidate and 2 or 3 of their best friends or a couple of their kids, and that's it. And so if you have an organization that has troops, as Ann said, that you can put on the ground, you are a huge asset to campaigns, because they just can't find volunteers. Who wants to do politics? It's icky business, right? So if you got folks who are willing to do that, you have a valuable asset to provide to the campaign.
I think that is critical. I mean, it's not always about, I guess, well, it is always about the money, but not always about the money. I mean, I literally in one campaign, I had a group that was very much interested in the outcome and wanted to get rid of the person that I was running against. And so for various reasons, they literally had 50 people who were volunteers. Now, the group was getting money from wherever, but they had 50 people who were volunteers. I bought t-shirts, but every weekend, every morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, every evening at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they were on the corners of the major thoroughfares, right, in my district. So they always saw my name. And I mean, so it was, I'm so sorry, I don't know how to turn this phone off, but it was really very, I couldn't get better coverage than to have people, real people, waving, smiling, and with my name on this shirt, right? Every morning and every evening. Oh, this is crazy.
So, I wanted to go to the next question, but just on that note, so obviously as a candidate, you need all the help, you need all the help. But like, if you had a candidate or a third party group walk in the door and say, hey, I can write you $1,000 check, I can get you volunteers, or I can do independent expenditures. Obviously they can't actually ask to do independent expenditures, but
right.
If you had that option as a candidate, what do you think the psyche of candidates are? Like, what are they more excited about? Are they excited about the donation, the independent expenditures, or the volunteers? If those things.
I would rank them this way. I would say they'd be most excited about the volunteers, second most excited about the money, because they get to spend it however they want, and they're short, right, in the campaign. What people undervalue is what the independent expenditure groups can do. Because I know there've been times where we've actually gone into a race and helped a candidate and spent maybe $50,000 on their behalf. And afterwards, when I will talk with them and people in their campaign, they're like, oh, we were so thankful that the realtors came in with a check for $1,000 at the end. That was really valuable. I'm thinking, we spent $50,000 on your behalf. But if the money doesn't touch, candidates overvalue hard contributions to their campaign, probably undervalue independent expenditures, but the thing that everyone values is volunteers.
Absolutely. And again, the group, like as you indicate, the realtors, just think about the reach, right? If the realtors have given you $1,000, that $1,000 in just word of mouth, in just that realtor pack saying, this is our candidate to 10,000 realtors, right? This person will help us with our issues, right? That's big. That is huge, in my opinion.
Gotcha. No, absolutely. Well, it's
On that note, there are small groups, as you mentioned, left-handed bicyclists. What can some of these smaller groups who can't cut the $10,000, $20,000 checks and maybe only have 4 or 5 volunteers, how can they lean into this selection and really be an asset to you? Whether it's policy, whether it's door knocking, what other value add can they give?
I would sit down with a campaign and say, here's what we got. We got 4 or 5 people who are willing to help out every Saturday.
Yep.
What can we do that would make the most difference for your campaign?
Yep.
And you will have a friend for life.
Yes.
I mean, honestly, I would say there was, it's amazing how valuable legislators or politicians think volunteers are. There's a woman from my hometown, Mrs. Lagaki. She's long gone now. But Mrs. Lagaki was big about putting yard signs up in her neighborhood. And she volunteered to do my yard signs in her neighborhood. And she could only afford to contribute $5 to my campaign, but she did my yard signs for that neighborhood. And you know what? When Mrs. Lagaki called my office with a request, she was on the priority list. Because I wanted her to put yard signs up in the next election. I mean, that was how valuable that was to me. It didn't matter that, she gave me a $5 token contribution to come to some event we had. It was the fact that she was willing to work for my campaign.
Right. And, I had a similar experience. I had a group of about 5 people who were retired, but they were very, very much politically active. And so they could be considered a third party group, but they really had nothing to offer me but time as it relates to, financial resources. But they were my 6 o'clock, 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning crew. Every morning, religiously, they were on, and I call it on the corner. They were on the corner at the intersections, the busy intersections in the morning, waving and cheering me on and just keeping my energy levels up and keeping me, upbeat, because we can get tired oftentimes, and when the people around you, oftentimes you're not sure where they're coming from and why they're there. But when you have people like that, where they're really, all they want is to help. Yeah. That to me is just, yes. And they too had an open door to my office.
I'm pulling out from what you said, though, both of you said on this note is, you don't have to come in the door with a lot, but just tell them what you can do. Like I think what Scott said, it's sort of like the old Bible study we all know, or a Bible story we all know about the woman, the poor woman that put in her last farthing, and and that was, Jesus said that was better than the one that gave whatever. And I think that's similar. So if you're a third party group and you feel insecurity about how small you are, what I'm hearing from you guys is just say, this is what I can do, So don't go in and oversell yourself. Don't worry about all that. Just say what you can do, and the candidate will appreciate that.
And let me just say, and I don't know if this is another question but I tend to, of course, I needed the money, with regards to contributions, but I was very skeptical when I was approached by a third party with a big check, because I didn't want to be beholden. And so, oftentimes I would accept, but with a very, my eyes wide open, as we used to say in my campaign. And so, and made it clear that if you believe that this check somehow will control me or my thoughts or my, whatever, then you might want to take the check back because it won't. Now, everybody's not going to do that, right? But for me, it 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 was not. Then again, it depended on the group, because if it was a group that was very close to my thoughts, and then of course I knew that we were aligned. But I was sometimes skeptical. I'm not going to say I didn't take the money. I was sometimes very skeptical, and it, I could have, after I had gotten to a point, I could have turned it away at some time, at some point.
Actually, and that gets to my next question. So let's keep on this conversation. I'll state it just so when a third party group approaches you, what are the first questions and thoughts that go through your mind? So, and how can they better make that first impression?
Yeah. What do they want from me? Okay. What do you want? Right. And you know what we all say, I can't make any promises. Right. I'll have my door open. But what do you want? And literally that is, I believe, what most candidates are thinking. Now, you have some people who, really they will just not care about what they want because they need to have the resources. But I think that it is always in the back of our minds. Okay, all right, what do I have to, what part of my soul do I have to give up if I accept this check?
So I think that's right. I think most candidates begin a little skeptical or a little on edge with, okay, what are they going to ask me to do? The flip of that is, I think then candidates say, well, what can they do for me? Right? Because there's an awful lot of people who come to see you when you're running for office who want to spend a bunch of time with you to tell you about their issue and what, their big concern or whatever. And as a candidate, you have to manage your time. And so you also have to ask, what can they do for me? Is this an organization or is this a group of folks who can help me get elected so I can turn around and, if I agree with them, help them on the issue they're concerned about. So it's a balancing act, I think, between those two questions.
Right.
So how do they make that first impression? How do they make a strong first impression then? So
well, I tell you what, the turnoffs are sort of easy to come up with. The people who threaten you that if you're not with us, we're going to beat you. We determine who gets elected around here. That never works with any candidate.
Never.
I mean, I just think that's just a really, really bad approach. But some people take that we decide elections around here, and you got to be with us or you're not going anywhere. That's just a bad idea. Another thing people do is they're not honest. They'll just tell you stuff about the people who disagree with them about the issue that is just not accurate. And then last of all, they will only tell you one side of the story. So you walk away thinking, well, this is easy. I mean, they made this compelling case why they deserve X, and I can't think of a single reason against it. Well, I would always ask people, so what do your opponents say? Why do people disagree with you about it? And some people would not want to tell you anything. And that was always made me skeptical of working with somebody who wasn't willing to give you the whole story.
Yeah, I agree with that, Scott. So I guess most people have a discernment, as it relates to when they're interacting with someone for the first time. I mean, we've all been in that situation where we've talked to somebody and there was just something about that person or that conversation or that was real, and then there was something about it that wasn't, right? And so I think that for most of us, although we're candidates and we still want to project this, image, we really are still people, and we interact with people the same way. If we're not, or we have the, we still have the vibes. And so for me, to Scott's point, if you approached me in a manner that was not overly aggressive, and that was, listen, here are my issues, here are our issues now, and then offered the other side and positioned yourself to explain why the other side was not the right side. But everyone has an opinion. But here are our issues. This is why we are where we are. Here's the impact. Now, the others will say this, and in many cases they have a good point. You give it all to me, right? And let me make that decision on where I want to be. But to Scott's point, if you give me one side, and then later I find out I've made some decisions, and then later I find out that I was lied to, or I just wasn't given all of the truth, then I'll never trust you. Because
Right.
I was taught on my first day, the first time you are caught in an untruth, you will never, ever, ever be trusted again. So that really stuck with me with regards to the political arena.
Yeah, it really is sort of a one strike and you're out rule with regards to telling the truth. If someone has told you something that's not true, you may meet with them again, but you'll never trust them again.
That's right.
Yeah, I was gonna say that word was coming to my mind, and then Ann articulated it. But it seems like trust and transparency, because they're gonna find this stuff out anyway. Come in the door, tell them where you are, be honest about it, give a fair representation of who you are and what you do and what people think about you, because you'll be better off in the long run. When I ran for office,
I got a question here, Jonathan. How does an organization, so let's say I'm a smaller organization, really passionate, approach you folks the right way, but what I'm asking of you is will take up a lot of your political capital, right? I'm asking you to take on the Dog Catcher Association, and they just run the state capitol. That takes relationship building. What does that relationship building look like to make you do something that might bring some independent expenditures next time you run for office, or might use up a lot of your political capital? How can a small organization really start to build political capital with you so that you spend some of yours for their effort?
If you really want, if someone's coming to make a huge ask of you to really take on the establishment in some way or whatever, I think it always helps to make an emotional connection between the candidate and the issue. So I work on a lot of issues when I was in the legislature, and now there are children's issues, and there's a lot of emotion around that. And those moments give you the courage to keep fighting, even when logically, perhaps the easier answer was to step aside and let someone else join that battle and not end up being scarred and by having to fight with a large, powerful organization. But I always felt comfortable leading that fight, speaking out on that issue, if I could almost feel and see the people who were impacted by it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the other piece is that I've had individuals after I was elected, I've had lobbyists who have known that they're gonna that they have helped me or with issues, or helped me with legislation that had nothing to do with what they were lobbying for, right? And so they use their influence on something that was very important to me to help me. And so when you have a small group like that who may have an issue that is a heavy lift, if I look back and say, well, they have helped me with this and they have helped me with that, and it has nothing to do with their issue, but they wanted to show that they cared about my success, then that opens my mind and my heart a little bit more to say, you know what, these are some good people. And I will do what I can to help, and be honest with them, and maybe figure out together how to develop the right strategy. And even if I couldn't, just how to give them inside information. I don't know if that's right to say, but how to give them inside information on how to get their thing done.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good. So if my next question, you kind of covered already. It was kind of top 3 things. You guys kind of covered that. Top 3 things they should and shouldn't do. So I think what I'll go with, to a series of specific items and get your feedback on that and how third-party groups should work with you. First one is candidate interviews. All right, your favorite part of being a candidate. What kind of things do candidates like to be asked, and what kind of things annoy them?
Well, first of all, we hate these
Oh,
interviews.
I'm
I don't like them. I got to a point where literally I had to have a person in my campaign who fielded every question, every question for me. They had to do the research. They had to do it because it's like, I don't know. Right. And so I don't know. It's very an uncomfortable time. It was for me. Because I guess, I don't like them. Or I didn't like them.
So I think candidates like to be asked about themselves and their campaign. They don't like to be asked to make a detailed commitment on an issue that they don't know a lot about. So you get lots of these groups who come forward to you, and it's a learning experience running for office. And so you hadn't known what the left-handed bicyclists really cared about until now. And you're really reluctant to make a commitment because you don't know what the right-handed bicyclists are going to say about this whole thing. Right. So I just think that a lot of groups through their interview process or their surveys really try to nail candidates down in great detail. And that's particularly for a first-time candidate. They don't know anything about sewage rates. That's right. They don't know anything about trucking limits. I mean, you can't possibly know all of those issues, and they get uncomfortable when they get asked to take positions on it. I think the other thing that Ann said is absolutely true. The first time I ran, we counted over 100 surveys that we got from various organizations. And there's probably about a dozen groups who asked to interview me in person. And I'm a first-time candidate, so I said, of course, I'll do that. Well, that was a mistake. I mean, first of all, now I'm recorded on 100 different groups' issues that I'm not even sure I understand what they're talking about. And then, when I went to the teachers union interview for me, I decided, since I thought they were going to oppose me, but they still wanted me to show up for the interview, I assumed it was to get ammunition to use against me. So I brought a tape recorder and I set it down on the table to make sure that I had a record of what I said and that they couldn't distort it. And they refused to go ahead with the interview. So at that point, I decided I'm only going to do the ones where I think the group can help me get elected. They have either a lot of volunteers or they have a lot of connections or clout of some sort in the election process. And after that, I only did a few interviews, and I never filled out a survey again once I was an incumbent. I was like, I have a record, go look it up. But.
Right. To me, I would prefer, instead of having a candidate interview, I would prefer candidate get to know me, right? Or get to know you. Where you
or your members.
I'm sorry?
Or get to know our members, yeah.
Get to know our members, right. Just come and have a conversation about who we are, what we are passionate about, what we work for every day, and hopefully we can find some synergies versus I sit at the head of the table and I have 2 or 3 members looking at me and asking me these questions that, as Scott said, I don't know. So it is
just the framing of that differently, and just like the get to know me, just the framing of that sets up a better conversation.
Absolutely. And so then you walk out and it didn't turn combative. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was just here's who I am as the candidate. Here are my views. And here's who you are. And hopefully we can find a place in the middle, or maybe we're all the way there. And maybe we're not, but at least we have not had a very uncomfortable, because look, you have some candidates who will eventually win, and that group will never get a seat at the table. That group that person, it may not be the group, but I don't like that person. I don't like the way they talked to me and they handled me and they made me feel this. I mean, literally, Scott, I was invited to the teachers union interview as well. And I literally, that was the worst day of my life. I walked, they had me outside. They had all of the teachers and their people, whatever they are in this room. And they made me walk from the back of the room down the middle aisle. They had people on the right and people on the left, all, and I mean, I'm serious, and walked to the front of the room and said, you have 60 seconds or 60, whatever, to answer this question. And they went to ask the question, and I went to answer it. Before I could get it, they said, time's up, no more time. I'm like, okay. And I literally walked all the way back down, and I cried. I mean, that was the first time and the last time that I cried. And I said, I'm not doing these things again. I'm just not doing them.
Do you think organizations like that think that show of force sends a signal to candidates, that positive, like a signal about their influence? Like, why do you think that they felt like intimidating a candidate?
Yeah, I think they believe that it was a form of intimidation and a way to show their power and their authority, and that they were in control. And at that moment, they were. After that moment, they were not.
Sure.
That's one thing that interest groups often forget is, I still remember once at the state capitol, there was a lobbyist who had thought she had the votes on a committee, and I had worked it quietly to steer the issue to a different direction. And she came and grabbed me as I was leaving the vote and said, "What gives you the right to do that?" And I just looked at her and said, "I got elected." I mean, I was sort of startled, but some of these interest groups do think they run the place and you're just supposed to be their helper.
Right. Absolutely.
What is it that an organization can do other than not be combative? What is something that they can do, whether in their questionnaire or in their interview or their get to know, that you would walk away the candidate being, especially as an incumbent, walking away, wow, that group's impressive. I'm going to pay attention.
I always liked it when people helped me to understand the issue.
Yes.
Then connected me to people in my district who were involved in the issue. I thought that was always very, very valuable.
Ditto. Yes, absolutely. That's the answer.
Gotcha. It's a memory. It sticks with you, right? Connects. Yeah. It's not just someone from your state capital, from Baton Rouge, from Madison coming to your district, but it applies to you there. Okay.
I mean,
and that's why I think a lot of these things should be done in the district rather than like they have you travel to the state capitol for the interview. Baloney, you should be doing it in the district where they actually get to meet 6 constituents who one of them might turn around afterwards and say, well, I know our group didn't choose to make an endorsement in this race, but I'm willing to help you. Right. I mean, that's worth going.
It's, we're taught, all politics is local, right? And so when we're elected, what we realize is that there are going to be a million issues that we will be confronted with. Thousands and thousands of laws that are presented, for consideration, or legislation that's presented for consideration. And the ones that we're going to pay attention to are the ones that are going to impact something in our district, right? And so I think that is, an important consideration.
Gotcha. Well, I have one more question, and then maybe we can do a little last word for this conversation. And my question is about independent expenditures. So we talked about them a little bit at the beginning, and just as a reminder for folks that are going to listen to this who don't quite remember what those are, that means a lot of states have limits on how much that a group can or an individual can give a candidate. But the Supreme Court has said, but we can't stop you from spending your own money as much as you want to promote a candidate as long as you don't coordinate that expenditure with them. So that's an independent expenditure. As Scott was saying before, a lot of candidates don't always value them, but they can be really important in in the whole mix of voter contact. They're not in control of the candidate, so the candidates probably creates like a high tension level when you hear or see something happening in your race that you're not controlling. So is there any way to put candidates more at ease within the legal bounds of independent expenditure law as a third party group? What are things you can do to help candidates feel more at ease and just feel better about what you're doing to support them from a third party perspective?
I don't, so I had a couple of groups who did some independent expenditures for me, and I really I valued those. I mean, I'm not sure, I mean, I thought they were very helpful, especially for in a situation when there was limited financial resources. Now, the one thing that kind of was like that's like, man, why couldn't they tell me? I wouldn't have spent my money on this, right? That because there's no the ability to coordinate with the group on the expenditure, we sometimes overlap. A real story. AFC, I think, had done an independent expenditure for me and had done these beautiful, wasn't AFC then, but it was a beautiful flyer, four color, all of it is beautiful. And I had spent my last dollar. I had to make a decision whether I go on radio or get these flyers printed, and I didn't have enough money to mail them. So we were out with my volunteers and we were putting them in, knocking on doors and talking to people and handing them flyers. Well, we passed the post lady and she's like, "Oh, this is a beautiful flyer you have." And I went, "What flyer? What flyer?" And when I saw it, I went, "Oh my God, we have just, now these people are getting two flyers. One looks like crap. The other is beautiful." So, it's unfortunate that the rules don't allow you to coordinate, but I thought they were very beneficial. Well, I did stop handing mine out. I just let her continue to mail the others.
I do think there's some things that you can do. I know not only does the coordination efficiency question come up to candidates and you can't do anything about that, but a lot of candidates get frustrated because they get blamed for your negative attack.
Oh,
so
yeah.
They'll be going door to door and people say, "I can't believe the trash that you have sent me." And you're like, "I didn't send any of that," and so I think it's helpful to you want to be effective, but you don't want to be ugly. You don't want to remember the candidate's going to have to answer for it, even though they had nothing to do with your independent expenditure. So be honest, be accurate. I also think while you cannot talk to the candidate, you can't, most candidates have mentors. It might be members of leadership. It might be a legislator who used to represent the district or whatever. And as soon as they hit 3 houses where somebody complains about your harsh attack on their opponent, and it would be helpful to have those people sort of say to them, "Here's how it works. It's okay." And that sort of thing, just to calm them down. I also think it helps to talk with candidates during the interview process. So before you've made a decision on supporting candidates, to say, we make contributions to candidates, or we do door to door for people, or we do mail and we like to specialize in things like that. I mean, some sense for them that, oh, if I do get this endorsement, this is the sort of stuff I can expect from this group. You can do that because you haven't made a decision yet about which candidate you're going to end up supporting. But it just seems to me to be helpful, stay within bounds. And then also it's helpful to have other people out there who can explain to them why what you're doing is actually helpful to them, because all they hear at the door is why it's not helpful.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, and Scott, do you have any parting thoughts on the topic?
No, I think this has been really a good topic, and I'm sure it's going to be very helpful to your audience. I think that the way we campaigned, well, me years ago, the strategies are so different today, and the methods by which we can reach hundreds of thousands of people is so much different today. But at the end of the day, the things that will always stay the same is the relationship and the trust and the transparency with whomever we come into contact with.
Great.
I guess I would add a tactic that people can use, or a strategy that I think is particularly smart and efficient for third-party groups. You know, sometimes the best way to win on your issue is to recruit good people to run for office who share your vision. Because if one of your own members runs for office, they understand the issue completely, and now you'll have one of your own people on the inside when the decisions are being made. And quite often, that doesn't take as much money as actually running independent expenditures on behalf of people. Last night, I had elections in another state that we were involved in, and we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in 13 races, but we won like 5 other races just simply because we went out and encouraged people who agreed with us to run for that office, and they won the primary, and it was a low cost affair, and we didn't have to do anything to help them. That's a pretty efficient way to make a difference at the state capitol, is to encourage good people who agree with you to run for office.
Right.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. That was one of the potential questions, if we made it that far, that I was going to ask about, and to remind third-party groups of that. And Christian and I are going to talk more about that down the line, but it's just something to continually remember, and we'll get into that, like I said. But Christian was having some internet issues there, unfortunately, but just really thankful for both of you being on. I think when Christian and I started this, one of the things that we said was that we have a lot of experience. We've been doing this for a long time, but we're not the only quote unquote smart people out there. And just as an example of that, I learned a lot today, just listening to both of you, that are things that I'm going to take and work with the people I partner with to do a better job of working with elected officials. And that's coming from someone who is an elected official. Like, even then, I'm still learning and what your perspectives are. So I'm really appreciative of you guys being a part of this conversation today. Thanks for all you've meant to me in my career. And I look forward to other people who watch this hearing what they take away from you guys. So with that, thank you all for listening this week, and we'll see you again next time.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Scott.
You bet.